Kidney. I would like to call our meeting to order. And do I have a motion for the approval of the agenda? Mr. Lovett.
I'd like to make the motion that we approve the agenda, which is line item number 2.
Second.
Who's second? Ms. Huddle? I'm sorry, I didn't see anything.
Second.
Okay, are all those in favor?
Aye.
Wait, I have
discussion first.
We have to discuss.
discussion on this.
Statement for discussion,
Okay, open for discussion on the agenda.
I'd like to propose 4 amendments to the agenda. And the first one is I'd like to make a motion that item 3C, discussion of the superintendent's goals, expectations, and board superintendent relationship, be moved to the action agenda to be conducted in public session.
Are you going to put the 3 together?
Do you want me to put all 4 of them at once or go one by one?
Let's do them one into one.
One by one? Okay.
I'll second his motion.
Okay, that was Ms. Hine. All right, discussion, and since you made the motion.
Yeah, my concern is and we've had other superintendents, assuming that Dr. Melton's okay with doing this in public. I know Dr. Hefner always requested that his be done in public, and my concern is because some of the conversations we've had previously that we've created a hostile environment with the superintendent, and I think it would be appropriate to do this in public where the public can see what we're asking. It's a little bit unorthodox that we're coming in at this point in the year and just sort of randomly doing questions with her. And I'm more than happy with Andrea White as counsel. We've worked with her before, but also would note that this is the first time I've seen a board actually go get counsel to consult with about the superintendent. So I think even that is somewhat intimidating and threatening to the superintendent. And so I think it's unorthodox, but my request is we do this thing publicly.
What I'd like to say is, as chair, my understanding of the meeting is, since we had 3 new board members, and we had done the goals and expectations in November, it was more of a review and a discussion of procedural, informative, not adversarial at all. It was my understanding of this meeting, and so I understand your point, but I just wanted to speak for the board. I know that it was not designed to be adversarial. I would like to, can I get the legal advice as far as that, is that legal to do, and what should you give us guidance on whether it should be here or in executive session?
Certainly. While it is unusual,
Can you go to the mic?
Yep. While it is unusual to have a discussion about a personnel matter, whether it's adversarial or not, just a discussion related to a specific employee, it is unusual to have it in open session. It does occur. The first thing would be that Dr. Melton would have to agree to that, to it being in open session. That would be the first caveat. And then the second caveat would be that because this is not an adversarial discussion, it's not any kind of a hearing or anything, ultimately it is up to the board to decide whether they wish to conduct it in executive session or open session, since it's the board's discussion with the superintendent. So it'd be legal to have it in open session if she agrees, but ultimately y'all make the decision pursuant to a vote.
Okay, thank you, Ms. White. Dr. Melton, would you like to say anything? Because we certainly respect what you think.
Sure. I think what Attorney White just shared, that it's ultimately up to the board. I would be comfortable either direction. I would support the board. Whichever the board finds of interest is what I would be willing to do.
Thank you. So we'll vote. Okay, Ms. Garner?
Well, I'm going to phrase that question a little differently. I'd like to know what you would prefer for us to do it out here or behind closed doors. I'll just say, if I were going to be in a review with my boss or the other way around, I wouldn't do it in public. But because those are personal matters, but if you would feel comfortable and you want us to do it in public, then I'd like to know that.
I apologize for the hesitation.
That's all right, you think about it, your preference,
And I have a comment while you think, if that's okay.
okay?
I agree with trustee Gardner. I would like to know what Dr. Milton prefers. Personally, I think that it is a good idea to have it in open session because I have heard from a lot of community members concern about the unorthodox item 3C and what that means for the board relationship with Dr. Melton, and there is concern about that. So I think that as a board that has argued for transparency from the board perspective, we don't have anything, it doesn't hurt anything to, if it's not an evaluation and we're not discussing her contract and we're just talking about the relationship between expectations of the board and the superintendent, I don't understand why it would not be an open session. If Dr. Melton is comfortable with that. I would assume that she's probably uncomfortable with this conversation right now. I could be out of line there, but, and I apologize for myself and for that, Dr. Melton.
I will acquiesce to Dr. Melton's wishes.
Thank you, Ms. Hammond. I would be supportive of the conversation in public with the request that staff is not included. That if there are concerns, that it's directed towards the superintendent rather than staff.
Okay, any other comments? But is that a preferred, or you're still either way?
I would support the board, but I am comfortable doing things in public. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So all those, you have to, yes?
You know, that last request, I mean, I'm not sure, because I came prepared to talk about certain things. I'm not certain, you know, to what extent that affects the staff. You know, I hope that the things that I had to say were said to the superintendent, but I don't know to what depth that goes. So, you know, that's just a hard thing to say on a moment's notice because I didn't realize that this was going to happen.
Okay. Mr. White?
Well, I mean, my response to that is, if, you know, rather than speak about a staff member, you save that for executive session, and you limit your conversations in public to Dr. Melton, and you're responsible for differentiating who you're talking about. I see that very easy to do, and if you want to reserve the right to talk about staff, but the agenda doesn't say we're talking about staff, it says we're talking about the superintendent.
All right, let's have a vote on that, so we need to move. Okay, Ms. Hines.
I would just say to what Mr. White just said and to what Mr. Lovelace just said, I think if I'm correct, if we were to vote for that amendment to the agenda, that would go under the action agenda. So we would go into executive session. So if there were items that were specifically related where staff would be involved, we would have already had that discussion before we have the discussion on the action. I mean, right? I mean, the amendment was to discuss the superintendent, to move 3C to the action agenda. So we still have to go into executive session. So if there were specific questions that you believe would tie into a staff discussion, we would already have that. That would have already taken place.
Ms. Hines, we're taking no action on that, so it would be under the discussion.
Okay.
There's no action.
Okay, then discussion.
This is an informative.
Right, then the discussion agenda.
I would like to amend his request. He said action.
He said action.
So I would like to amend the motion to say that we move item 3C to the discussion agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, did you get that, Ms.? You got that. Did you have a question? That was your point, yeah. It's not an action agenda.
Right.
It's an informative thing. All right, let's get moving.
I have something to say to the amendment. One of the items, I just reviewed quickly everything in here, but one of the items that I had to discuss has to do with a former consultant. That person is not a staff member, and so I would take it under advisement that I would be able to do that because that contract is a public contract, and that I should be able to to refer to that.
Ms. White? can you-
I would say that is accurate if there is a contract with that person. Not knowing who you're talking about, it's real hard for me to be specific in responding to that.
It's not an employee. It was a hired consultant from the outside.
Okay. I would say if it was a hired consultant from the outside, that it would be appropriate to have that in open session rather. But if you're going to talk about any current or even former employees of the district, then that needs to happen in executive session, not in open session.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Ms. Huddle, you had an amendment, you just changed the wording from action to discussion. Okay, so we can vote on that.
We need a second for.
I seconded.
Yeah, it was a
I
second.
seconded.
I'm sorry, but I didn't say that, Ms. Hines. Okay, well, all those in favor of moving that to open session, raise your hands.
Wait a minute, we got to vote on the amendment first.
That is the amendment to move it to discussion.
Discussion.
And there was a second.
I got you.
So now.
But
you
we need
say-
to, we don't need to discuss that. You gave us that answer. But, all right, all those to Ms. Huddle's
Ms.
amendment.
Hammond, just repeat the whole motion here. The motion is to approve the agenda with the amendment of moving item 3C to the discussion part of the agenda.
Approve the amendment. I didn't write that fast. Aaron, can you read that? Did you write it fast? Got to approve the amendment.
Ms. Hammond, could you ask the board member that made the motion with the amendment to restate that so Ms. Strange could capture? I'm trying to be protective of Ms. Strange to make sure that her record keeping is accurate to capture what the board is making sure they get a record.
Ms. Huddle?
I move that we amend the motion to move item 3C to the discussion agenda rather than the action agenda.
You got it, Ms. Strange. All right, all those in favor of moving it into this session?
Discussion.
And those opposed? Was it 7-0?
I think we still have to vote on the original.
You do on the original motion.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, so you voted on the amendment, so now go back and
To the
restate.
original motion
Right.
that Mr. White made. You want to read it?
That item 3C, discussion of the superintendent's goals, expectations, and board superintendent relationship be moved to the discussion agenda to be conducted in public session.
Okay, all those in favor of public session? Okay, 7-0. Okay, and your second one?
Okay, the second one is that a new item be added to the action agenda to read, requiring board officer meetings to be open to the public, including live streaming the meeting in accordance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act.
I second.
That Ms. Hines? Okay.
And
Discussion.
two things. One, this past week, and everybody on this board knows, the public doesn't know this, but everybody on this board knows that our emails are filling up daily with concerns about reentry. And there's basically three groups of constituents in the schools: the people that are in virtual, that appear to be happy to the extent they want to be in virtual; the people that want 5-day face-to-face, that appear to be happy that that's the current structure that we have right now, or we're moving towards. And then there's a lot of people.
I mean, we're discussing now. Aren't we just supposed to make the motion? Then you
Yes.
get
Yeah, let's do. Let's do. Ms. Huddle, that's right.
Discussing
Just
the
make your
agenda.
motion.
Let me, it wasn't
Then we'll
I,
discuss it, but we
I
didn't.
made the motion, correct? And then I
Yeah,
asked
but
for,
we got to get a second to discuss it.
I
she seconded it.
Okay.
But you can only
And then it
have
went to
discussion about the
discussion,
agenda.
and I'm advocating the reason for the motion. And the big constituency that's responding to us in emails are the people that are in hybrid today, and they don't feel like they have anywhere to go. And at a minimum, they ought to understand the assessment. It troubles me, and I think it's inexcusable that we published an agenda where reentry was not on there when we were in the middle of a pandemic. And I know you and I talked about this, Ms. Hammond, and you said the board officers decided to keep it off because of there was not going to be a change, and had the public been live streaming that agenda, they could have very quickly seen that and asked for more, because we were left by Friday trying to answer questions as to why And if you're not a board officer, you don't know what's going on. I've also been told about there's some folks that think a committee that 3 people meeting as board members might be a public body under FOIA anyway, and that there's some districts that don't have board officers meeting for that reason. But I think in the spirit of transparency, there's nothing wrong, and whether y'all, and you and I are chatting before the meeting a little bit, Ms. Hammond, but you know, if y'all currently meet in Dr. Melton's office, there's a boardroom next door, you can put a camera up there. If 8 people wanted to show up, I don't think you have that much, but at least they have the visibility. And then the other concern about, are we creating a hostile environment for the superintendent to the extent that it's transparent, the interactions with the board officers, then the public can see those interactions. Because this superintendent, even though she, you know, is hired by the board, she is the community superintendent. She doesn't work for any of us individually. And the people that deal with her on a day-to-day basis as board officers, they ought to be reviewed and scrutinized as well in their relationship with her.
This has nothing to do with the amendment to the agenda. I apologize. What am I supposed to say?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was looking, I'm sorry.
Because I'd like to answer, you know,
But
about the agenda.
you should
item.
answer after I'm
I'd like
finished
to-
speaking.
We'd like to have some
Just a
time to do
minute,
that.
let's,
Yeah.
we need decorum.
You've gone off on the discussion. We're talking about amending the agenda.
That's true, but he does get to explain it, but
I gave the
I think-
reasons for
And then
making,
you're attacking the board now.
Point of order.
what's that?
Go ahead, as long as I get to say
Yeah,
something.
Ms. Gardner, wait a minute, and
Yeah.
I want to hear from you. Mr. White, I think if you can wrap up that, because we hadn't.
Well, I'm done now. I couldn't hear what she was saying.
I would like to speak to the fact that the precedent of the years I've been on the board officers met, I do know sometimes it was just the superintendent and the board chair, but I can assure you, I did make some calls today to other board chairs, and I don't know that there's a school board in the state that live streams the board officers meetings. It's not I have any problem with it, but I see no need for it. Ms. Gardner.
I just want to remind everyone, and maybe Mr. White can explain this to us, that we've inherited the processes of this board and that the previous 2, 4, 5 chairs have done it this way, and that he was on the board and never made an exception. Because I have been where Ed White is sitting. I have asked them to not do these meetings this way. And so now that I am an officer, I assure you that we are working towards making this more transparent, but we have to fix the process. We have to fix the policies. We have to do this the right way. We can't just throw it all out right now because we're in a pandemic. We have to continue with the way we're doing things, and we inherited these processes, and so we're going to work on them.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner. Ms. Hine.
So my reason for supporting this motion is it kind of feeds on what Ms. Gardner just said. I believe that we all have said that we want to be transparent. We have talked about how prior boards did not make other board members feel included. I think that if we're talking about putting items on the agenda or removing items on the agenda, a simple live stream to see how the process happened is just being transparent. And to say that we can't change everything at one time is a little ironic when we're trying to change board policies without even having training. So I just think that for me, supporting this motion is we're trying to say that we're being transparent to the public. And it's not requiring that much additional work to hit a live stream button to allow to see how the process is, how the agenda is being set. Because for years, we've talked about how items were not put on the agenda or items, you know, were removed from the agenda or what have you. Whatever allegations, you know, you hear those rumors. Being transparent and putting everything where you have to see how the process is working is not a bad thing.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Ms., well, since you haven't spoken yet, you go, and then I'll
Okay.
come back to you. Kathy was,
No, Ms.
I
Gardner.
called on Mr.
Who do you
White.
want to sue? Me or?
Kathy.
I'd like to ask Ms. White to weigh in on Mr. White. Man, we have too many Whites in here. Mr. White said that he thought it was a FOIA requirement. So if you don't mind, I'd like you to weigh in on that, if there are 3 officers meeting with the superintendent.
I do not, it's my opinion that FOIA does not require that those agenda-setting meetings be conducted publicly, like as a meeting like this, because it is for the sole purpose of setting the agenda. It's not for, acting upon any matter before the board, and it's not even a board committee that's going to report back to the board. It's setting an agenda for the board to then discuss. Now, could you do it? Yes, you could certainly act to do that, but it's my opinion that FOIA doesn't require it.
And I would like to make an amendment.
All right, well, they had,
Can I?
you want to go to speed this up, do y'all still want to have your, okay, Mr. Levis, and I'll come back to you.
This board has only had two meetings, okay? And my take on it is that it is an opportunity for those of us who have fielded information from the other board members, and that it's an opportunity for us to discuss with the superintendent, because that's what the policies say, the things that we may want to present or we may not want to present. And sometimes, when you have an idea, it may be not the proper time to do it, or it may be not the proper thing to do, or whatever, and it's an opportunity for the superintendent to tell us what she thinks. It's an opportunity for the board chair to know. And I don't believe that putting that in the public, this is a public meeting. The agenda is made so that we can all get together and discuss it. I don't think there's been any movement not to include what other board members want on the agenda. So I don't really see the need in it, and there's no precedent for it. And beside that, it's like Andrea White said, it's not a FOIA-able meeting. So I don't understand why the big push to do this.
And Mr. Levis, I'd just like to say as chair, I certainly listen to all 6 of you. And so it's a little bit offensive to me that you think we have to be live streamed for me to be upfront and transparent. So, but it's the will of the board. We'll take a vote on it. And did you want to say something, or you have an amendment?
Yeah, I have an amendment. I'd like to amend the motion that the agenda cannot be changed after that meeting is held. Because Mr. White just said that he got you to change it and none of the rest of us knew about it. So that would be my amendment. The agenda cannot be changed once that meeting is ended and the agenda is set.
I think
Otherwise, the whole thing's a joke. We're going to live stream the meeting, but people are going to willy-nilly change the agenda. So that's my issue.
the way I feel, I'm not going to vote for the original motion. You want to me, your motion maybe ought to be a standalone motion.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think that connects to his.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, that's me.
Okay,
I agree.
Ms. White?
Okay, I withdraw
You're
the
the
amendment.
parliamentarian tonight, so that you keep me straight. All right, let's vote on
I withdraw.
Mr. White, will you repeat your motion?
Kate, I got one more comment.
We're
too.
never going to get to our.
That a new item be added to the action agenda to read, requiring board officer meetings to be open to the public, including live streaming the meeting in accordance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act. And, my last comment on that is the reason is transparency. The only way you make a change is by making a change. I've never been a board officer. I've never cared about being a board officer. I don't care except to the extent if it impacts retention of our superintendent. And in the spirit of transparency, this board could try it, if nothing else. And if it got to be a practical problem, and Andrea White has indicated she doesn't believe it's a legal requirement, it doesn't have to be a legal requirement. It doesn't have to be a precedent. It could be a change so that the public sees what's going on. And I give the fact that people are calling saying, why is something not on the agenda,
Okay, let's
is a
call
reason
for
to do that.
I'm going to call for the question, okay? Because we got to get back to session. All those in favor of Mr. White's motion that he just read, which would be making the board officers meeting live streamed and a public meeting. If you in favor of that motion, raise your hand. 2. All those opposed? And that is 5 to 2. Okay, we're back to, keep me straight, Ms. White. We are back to approving the agenda.
I had two more motions.
Oh, you had 4?
Yes. The next
Excuse me,
one
Ms.
was
White.
that a new item be added to the discussion agenda to read financial relationship of Ken Lovelace with a vendor and recusal requirements.
I'll second.
Is there a second?
She seconded it. And I sent, the public doesn't know this, but I sent an email to Ms. Hammond today and the entire board detailing an ethics opinion that Mr. Lovelace had obtained, given the fact that he has a financial relationship with our construction company, and there are clear directives in that I don't see evidence they've been complied with, and the request is to make a public disclosure of that financial relationship that's actually required by the ethics opinion, and then make sure that the recusal requirements, responsibilities are met.
Well, and if
Ms.
I
White?
could speak to the legality of this amendment.
Yes.
Since this is actually a new item that would be up for discussion, you're gonna have to have a 2/3 vote.
That's right.
Microphone.
Yeah, a 2/3 vote. Mr. Lovelace, you certainly can answer.
Yeah, I was in this very room about 3 months ago, and Mr. White proceeded to put me on trial. I run a construction company. I am the president and an employee of Lovelace Commercial Contracting. We've been doing business for 35 years in the community, and we've worked with numerous contractors. We bid on a project for the state of South Carolina with a contractor who was, we didn't bid only to him, we bid with 6 other contractors, and were awarded on a low bid contract. But that occurred after anything to do with contract construction and its award and subsequent construction of our school. My company has never worked for District 5, and it wasn't related to District 5. I realized because I proactively sent after this was brought to my attention, after I was put on trial by Mr. White, I sent to the South Carolina Ethics Commission, and I asked them, because they won't rule on past things, they rule on a future situation. So I sent them and asked them, and they said I must recuse according to statute 700, I think it was. Nothing has ever come up since that point. I intend to recuse myself. In fact, I'll go ahead and do that right away so Mr. White can be satisfied with his obsession. But I have done nothing wrong. I will be glad to recuse myself, but just because I recuse myself does not mean that I cannot go on a construction site and you're abridging my rights as a school board member to do that. And if you're going to attempt to do that, then you need to say it outright.
All right, Mr. Lovelace, let's keep this short, Ms. Hines.
Right. So my comment to the discussion of this motion is that there is a question asked, and I appreciate Mr. Lovelace's clarification and his recusal to any involvement with contract construction. But for purposes of adding this to a discussion, I think that there has been there have been requests regarding a new school, and there is an opinion now, and there is some question as to whether or not that is proper procedure. And I want to make sure that we all cover ourselves, Mr. Lovelace included. It's not a dig at Mr. Lovelace at all. I just want the conversation to happen. Because I just don't know as a new board member. And since it was brought up and we have the ethics opinion in front of us and there is a relationship that Mr. Lovelace has now disclosed, there have been a lot of conversations and emails about site visits with only 1 or 2 board members. And I know that will be brought up in a later conversation this evening. I just want us to make sure that we are being transparent and we are doing what we need to do as a board so that we don't open ourselves up to liability. I think the conversation is worth having.
Ms. Hines,
Thank you.
I don't disagree with you, but I think with the amount of things and the important things that are on this agenda tonight, we really need to move forward. We just got the word from Ms. White. This has to be a super majority. So let's vote on it instead of discussing it, because we agree that it's important, but we have a lot of stuff that's already important tonight that we haven't even gotten to yet.
Okay, one other comment. First of all, for clarification, this is not a personal debate between Mr. Lovelace and myself. It isn't anything to do with his business. I don't know anything about his business. It has to do with the fact that there's an opinion of the South Carolina Ethics Commission that he put on the record, and it's dated September 25th, 2020, and that opinion says two things. It says it is not a conflict of interest for him to have a job with contract construction. That is the Ethics Commission's conclusion. It's not mine. The other thing this ethics opinion clearly says is he's required to recuse himself, and that is broader than just voting on contract construction. He can't participate in any way trying to influence the members of this board or this district about anything to do with that matter. The only way he can accomplish that is to recuse himself from all conversations. And in the last 2 months, we've had 2 requests, and even though we had board policy, we had discussions this summer. Now, I want to get this on the record because the Ethics Commission ought to have, I made this statement publicly.
But point of order, we need to move forward. I'm not disagreeing that this can be brought up, but not, we need to vote, and then if they want,
Then we can test it.
then we can have more discussion. You've explained it, and I get it. And I'm not trying to be rude to either you or Mr. Lovelace, but we have a full house tonight on very important things, and we need to move to them. And this is important. And Ms. Hines, I don't disagree, but this is not the right time and place unless this board wants to do it. But let's vote.
Yes.
Let's vote.
Can I
Okay,
I'll be
Ms.
quick.
Gardner, I'd like to vote.
I know, and I'll call for the question when I'm done. But I have to say this. I think it's important that we understand that I have not, as a secretary, been approached by any board member about this, and they had the right to do that a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 days ago, 5 minutes ago, and we would have probably talked about putting it on the agenda, but we didn't, and they're throwing it at us here. It's not fair because we don't have an ethics commission. We haven't been able to ask them, and Mr. Lovelace is not prepared, so if we do talk about this, it needs to be a future meeting, not tonight,
Right,
and I
I
call for
agree.
the question.
I'm call for the
wanna
question.
agree
I'd
with
like
her.
to vote. We're going to vote, Ms. Hines. All those in favor of Mr. White's motion, raise your hand. All those opposed? It's a 2-5. What, is you have one more? 4? Is that
Yeah,
4?
the fourth motion is that item 14 on the action agenda, approval of revisions to policy BDE, board committees be postponed until all new board members have received their required training from the South Carolina School Board Association. The policy has been reviewed by a representative from the South Carolina School Board Association for legal compliance or concerns, and a presentation has been made to the full board in a public meeting on best practices, the proper use of board committees, and an understanding of the provisions of the policy that is currently being modified.
I'll second.
Ms. Hines, second. Try to do it.
And I'll make this quick, 3 points. First of all, Ms. Hammond, you and I are the only people who have been on this board more than 2 years. So there's a lot of people that there's still a lot of depth of learning to occur. There's a lot of penetrating history with board committees, and I think the new board members ought to have their training so they can properly understand and advocate for their roles and make a more informed decision about this rather than it being rushed through at the beginning of their terms. That can be in the spring whenever the training is. And also, I think it's important that all of our policies are reviewed. You know, they could be done by legal counsel, but I think the School Board Association has served as an agency that has people that they're professionals that spend their time drafting policies, and they know best practices, they know what the entire state's doing, and there's a lot of value, and that's probably the most efficient way, not only for legal compliance, but for are these good policies, are there pitfalls that we don't see, particularly the people that are new to this board. The third thing is, I think and we did this when we corrected the problems with board committees in the past, is that we had the executive director come present to us and give us more information about best practices. I see that it was modified based on the policy I requested, the Fort Mill, which I think is a good step forward. But I have questions about what is our old policy, what was it intended to do, and I'd like to hear from more experienced voices before we just go headlong into this. This can be tabled until the spring and everybody be better informed and more conscious of this decision, because it's a fundamental issue that could radically change the way this board functions.
Ms. Huddle?
I have 3 issues. Number one, Mr. White in the last meeting said that he believed this was the School Board Association's model policy. And the policy before us is exactly word for word the policy he recommended. Number 2, I think in my very, very short time on the school board, I've been asked to approve 5 or 6 policies, and he's not once had this same concern. And number 3, he wants us to spend more money, more taxpayer money, to approve a policy and get more training on something that he himself said he thought was the model school board policy. Thank you.
Ms. Hines?
I'm just trying to flip to that policy, because give me 1 second. I thought that policy that was submitted was not word for word. I could be wrong, but my biggest problem with having this on the agenda the way that it was listed, and it may be that I make another motion, is that we haven't had a first reading. And on the agenda, it states that it is, that we are approving the revisions of that policy, and I want to make sure that we are doing this by the book. And it kind of speaks to Mr. White's concerns that, you know, we haven't even had a conversation. So we can't approve a board policy if it hasn't had a first reading, and we haven't had a first reading. So maybe if Mr. White's motion doesn't carry, you know, the proper procedure is to amend the discussion to have a first reading put on the discussion agenda.
Ms. Hines, we'll defer to Ms. White as parliamentarian. That was on the discussion agenda last time, so it could be the first reading tonight.
Be the first reading.
Yes.
But it's not put as a first reading. If this is on the action agenda as approval of revisions, and like I said, I think that there's a little bit of a discrepancy of the wording of the policy because we didn't finish that conversation.
Well, we can get that straight. Ms. Gardner?
We did get legal counsel on that. We were told that when we make the movement, or when we motion to approve it, that we say that we're suspending our normal 2 readings in order to approve it. So if it doesn't pass under those circumstances, it doesn't. But that's what I was told.
Right.
So where are we getting this legal conversation?
But legal.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hines, you don't have the floor. Ms. Gardner?
You can suspend a policy that requires 2 readings. You have to vote to do that. You
Right.
have a motion and a second to suspend the requirements for policy adoption.
That's what we were told. So if that's the way it happens tonight, that's the way it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But
Can we get to that?
that will happen later.
Let's vote on, let's call for the question on Mr. White's motion. All those in favor, would you read it one more time? Was it real long, though? Just give us the gist.
Well, it's as long as it is.
It is long, I do remember.
It had 3 components. I'll read it again real quick. That item 14 on the action agenda, approval of revisions to policy BDE, board committees, be postponed until all new board members have received their required training from the South Carolina School Board Association. The policy has been reviewed by a representative from the South Carolina School Board Association for legal compliance or concerns, and a presentation has been made to the full board in a public meeting on best practices, the proper use of board committees, and an understanding of the provisions of the policy that is currently being modified.
Thank you, Mr. White. All those in favor? 2. All those opposed? 5. The motion fails. Can we really go back to the original motion to approve the agenda? Who made that? Ms. Strange, who made that? Mr. Lovelace? Okay, and you second? So all those in favor to go into executive session, raise your hand.
No, approve the agenda.
State what the purposes are now, because the one.
Oh, I have to, you have to say them for me. All right, so we have changed, all right, in an executive session to consider the following. Selected employment items, seen exhibit A.
We have to approve the agenda.
That's what I'm doing.
No, you're going into executive session.
Sorry, approve the agenda. All right, all those in favor of approving the agenda
As amended.
as amended? 7-0. Now, do I have a motion to enter executive session to consider the following? Okay. Anybody want to make that? And Huddle make that.
Make the motion to enter executive session to consider items 3A and B.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? 7-0. It would be time to be right back out here.